Carl Jung identified a distinct power concealed within those who choose to walk alone. While society labels them as outsiders or broken, Jung recognized them as some of the most psychologically resilient individuals to ever exist. What Jung uncovered about people who kept no friends wasn't merely controversial. It was dangerous enough that he cautioned other psychologists to approach these individuals with extreme care. Society views the loner as antisocial, flawed, or damaged. But Jung's research revealed something that threatens the very foundation of how human relationships are structured. He discovered that forced socialization is the real pathology. And the loner represents something evolution has been shaping for thousands of years. The real question isn't why some people walk alone. The question is why everyone else is so afraid of solitude that they'll endure toxic relationships rather than confront themselves. Jung's clinical records reveal a disturbing pattern. Individuals who kept no friends were not suffering from social deficiencies. They had developed resistance to the most powerful force governing human behavior: groupthink, the craving for external validation, the psychological restraints that keep most people obedient to collective unconscious contracts they never knowingly agreed to. The loner cannot be controlled through social pressure because they genuinely do not seek approval from the group. Jung referred to this as psychological independence. Most people believe they make autonomous choices. Jung's research proved otherwise. Through his concept of the collective unconscious, he demonstrated that most human behavior is unconsciously aligned with group expectations. People dress similarly, think similarly, and make decisions that feel personal but are actually shared patterns absorbed without awareness. Think about the last decision you made based on how others might perceive you. What career would appear impressive? What relationship would seem acceptable? What opinions would keep you included in your circle? Most people perform dozens of these calculations daily without realizing they've surrendered control of their lives to invisible judges who never asked for that authority. The loner exists outside this system, not because they're rebelling against it, but because they never connected to it in the first place. Their mind developed differently. While other children learn to regulate their nervous system through approval, the loner's nervous system learned to self-regulate through solitude. When other kids needed laughter from the group to feel okay, the loner felt okay alone. When other teenagers depended on constant validation through friendships, the loner found validation through inner alignment. This creates something that terrifies those who rule through social pressure. An individual who cannot be threatened with exclusion because inclusion was never their currency. Someone who observes the group without needing to belong to it. Jung documented this pattern across dozens of cases. And what he discovered made him realize he wasn't studying pathology. He was studying the only humans who had escaped the invisible prison holding everyone else captive. The loner is a dangerous observer. Similar to Jung's empath archetype, the loner watches and gathers data on human behavior with scientific clarity. While others participate in social theater, performing roles and maintaining masks, the loner stands outside the performance and sees the mechanisms that make it function. They see the lies people tell themselves, the contradictions between words and actions, the patterns repeating across different groups, relationships, and systems. While others are busy performing, the loner is learning. Jung realized that loners develop a level of social intelligence that most people never reach in a lifetime. But they develop it as observers, not participants. The loner notices the person preaching family values while betraying their spouse. They see the friend who claims loyalty while subtly undermining you in group settings. They recognize the colleague who smiles publicly while sabotaging projects privately. These observations are not cynicism. They are pattern recognition unfiltered by the need to preserve social harmony. This observational position grants access to truths that make participation impossible. Once you see how the game operates, you can't pretend you don't. Once the patterns become visible, they can't be unseen. The loner's knowledge becomes their isolation because speaking these truths threatens the unspoken agreements that keep groups intact. Every group has rules about what can and cannot be acknowledged. The loner sees these rules clearly and finds them absurd. Jung wrote extensively about how groups unconsciously agree to ignore certain realities to maintain cohesion. The family that never addresses the father's drinking. The workplace that refuses to acknowledge the toxic manager. The friend group that pretends not to notice one person's constant victimhood. These collective denial contracts stabilize the group, but they require universal participation. The loner who names the obvious becomes the problem. Not because they're wrong, but because they violate the agreement. Most people confuse the loner with someone who is lonely. Jung was deeply focused on correcting this misunderstanding because of the damage it causes. Loneliness is a deficiency, a painful state where someone longs for connection they cannot attain. Loneliness is suffering caused by unwanted isolation. The lonely person scrolls social media feeling excluded. They attend events they dislike just to avoid being alone. They tolerate disrespect because bad company feels safer than no company. Solitude is a superpower. Empaths are not broken. Solitude is a chosen state where a person gains access to their own consciousness without interference from collective expectations. Solitude is when the nervous system finally stops processing everyone else's emotions and demands and begins responding to its own authentic signals. In solitude, you discover what you truly think, not what you were conditioned to think. You learn what you actually enjoy, not what you were told you should enjoy. You gain access to your real preferences, values, and desires. The lonely person is weakened by isolation. The solitary person is empowered by it. Jung spent years examining this distinction and found that true loners do not experience loneliness the way others do. They experience clarity, relief, and freedom from the exhausting performance of social approval. Where others feel hollow in solitude, the loner feels complete. Where others grow anxious without social stimulation, the loner feels grounded. When a loner is pushed into social environments, they don't experience connection. They experience interference. Like static interrupting a clean signal. This isn't dysfunction. It's a different nervous system setup that registers social input as noise rather than nourishment. The small talk others use to bond registers as empty sound. The rituals others find reassuring feel like elaborate drains on energy. Pretending interest in topics that don't matter produces fatigue instead of engagement. Jung observed that loners often leave social settings feeling depleted rather than energized. Not because they're introverted in the traditional sense, but because they're processing the distance between what people say and what they actually mean. They're watching the performance while simultaneously tracking the genuine emotions leaking through it. This dual awareness is exhausting. Solitude isn't just preferred. It's required for psychological restoration. Jung discovered that loners are often the only ones willing to face their own darkness. He called this the shadow. The aspects of yourself you were taught to deny, suppress, or project onto others. Most people spend their lives fleeing from their shadow, hiding inside groups where they can point outward and say, "That's where the evil is. That's where weakness lives, not in me." Groups provide endless opportunities for shadow projection. You can avoid confronting your own cruelty by obsessing over the cruelty of others. You can escape your own dishonesty by judging how dishonest everyone else is. You can deny your insecurities by ridiculing them in others. The group becomes a hall of mirrors where everyone reflects their shadow outward and no one has to face their own. The loner doesn't have that escape. When you spend long periods alone, you eventually encounter everything you've been avoiding. Your capacity for cruelty, your selfishness, your fears, your weaknesses. Everything the group taught you was unacceptable to acknowledge. In solitude, there's no one else to blame, no one to compare yourself to, no one to distract you from your own psychological reality. Jung found that loners who successfully integrate their shadow become psychologically stronger than those who hide inside groups. Because once you've faced your darkness and survived it, you're no longer afraid of it. You're no longer controlled by the fear of exposure. This creates immunity to shame as a tool of control. You've already examined the worst parts of yourself and decided you can live with them. That acceptance forms unshakable psychological stability. A person who has integrated their shadow knows they're capable of selfishness, so accusations of selfishness don't collapse them. They know they're capable of cruelty, so recognizing it doesn't destroy their self-image. They've accepted their full humanity, light and dark together. Paradoxically, this makes them less dangerous than people who deny their shadow, because they're conscious of their capacity for harm and can choose otherwise. This integration produces what Jung called psychological sovereignty. The loner who has faced their darkness cannot be controlled by threats of exposure. They already know what they're capable of. They've already accepted it. This makes them unblackmailable, unshameable, and unreachable through the social mechanisms that keep most people compliant. Jung documented this process in his own life. During his confrontation with the unconscious, he spent years in solitude facing psychological material that would have shattered most people. He experienced visions that could have been labeled psychosis. He felt emotions that could have caused collapse. He encountered parts of himself that contradicted everything he wanted to believe about who he was. But he didn't flee from these experiences. He analyzed them. He integrated them. He emerged fundamentally transformed, no longer afraid of his own mind, no longer dependent on external approval, psychologically whole in a way few ever achieve. Jung's work on the shadow, archetypes, and individuation all emerged from his willingness to spend years alone with psychological contents that terrified him. The loner's development follows the same trajectory. Solitude forces shadow integration. Shadow integration produces sovereignty. Sovereignty threatens any system built on controlling people through shame and social pressure. This is where Jung's research becomes truly dangerous. Because the loner who has integrated their shadow and achieved psychological sovereignty reaches a point where they can make choices that terrify the group. They can walk away from toxic systems without fear. They can speak truths without worrying about social consequences. They can act on personal values even when those values conflict with collective expectations. Jung called this moment the snap. Not a breakdown, but a moment of absolute clarity where the loner acts because they no longer need the group's permission. They become capable of decisions the group finds incomprehensible or threatening. Whistleblowers who sacrifice careers to expose corruption. Truth-tellers who risk reputation to say what everyone knows but won't admit. People who abandon prestigious positions because the work violates their values. Individuals who choose integrity over inclusion, even when inclusion would be easier, safer, or more profitable. The group responds to these choices with punishment because they threaten the collective agreements that keep the system intact. Organizations exile whistleblowers. Social circles ostracize truth-tellers. Families scapegoat members who refuse to uphold shared denial. But the loner who has reached psychological sovereignty cannot be controlled by punishment rooted in social pain. Exclusion doesn't wound someone who never depended on belonging. Shame loses its power once the shadow has been integrated. Damage to reputation is meaningless when identity was never built on external approval. This is what makes the loner dangerous. Not because they are immoral, but because they are free. Freedom is the ultimate threat to systems designed around control. A person who cannot be manipulated, shamed, or coerced into compliance is capable of dismantling power structures simply by refusing to participate. They can decline opportunities everyone else competes for. They can leave relationships others tolerate. They can question beliefs others defend without reflection. Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon and arrived at a conclusion that still unsettles psychology. The loner is not broken. The loner is evolved. They represent what human consciousness can become when it develops outside the constraints of collective unconscious programming. They are not lacking something others possess. They are accessing something most people never reach. Most people are running psychological code downloaded from their culture without ever checking whether it serves them. Beliefs about success, assumptions about relationships, rules about acceptable emotions, scripts for how life should unfold. This programming operates in the background, shaping choices that feel personal but are actually collective patterns repeated across millions of lives. The loner rejected the download and built their own operating system. This makes them incompatible with standard social infrastructure, but also capable of innovations groupthink could never generate. Because they are not bound by collective agreements about what is possible, they can see solutions others cannot imagine. Because they are not invested in preserving the status quo, they can advocate change others fear. Jung found that many of history's major breakthroughs came from loners. Artists who worked in isolation for years before recognition arrived. Scientists who pursued questions everyone else dismissed as impossible or irrelevant. Philosophers who expressed ideas no one wanted to hear. Inventors who built prototypes alone while others called them irrational. These individuals perceived possibilities that groupthink rendered invisible because they were not constrained by shared assumptions about what was acceptable to imagine. The loner's legacy is not loneliness. It is liberation. Not only for themselves, but for everyone who witnesses someone living by their own values instead of collective expectations. Every loner who achieves psychological sovereignty demonstrates that it is possible, that survival outside the group is real, that the shadow can be faced and integrated, that freedom from collective control is attainable if one is willing to pay the cost of solitude. Jung understood this personally because he lived it. His break with Freud left him professionally isolated. Former colleagues dismissed him. His theories were mocked. His confrontation with the unconscious placed him in psychological territory no one else could enter alongside him. But that solitude produced some of the most profound insights in psychological history. Concepts that transformed our understanding of consciousness. Ideas that continue to shape psychology, spirituality, and philosophy decades after his death. The loner who keeps no friends is not avoiding connection. They are protecting their consciousness from interference to access truths collective participation conceals. They are not failing at social relationships. They are succeeding at something most people never attempt. The development of a fully individuated self capable of thinking its own thoughts, feeling its own emotions, and living by its own values. The world needs loners. Not because they are superior, but because they perceive what others cannot. They think thoughts others are afraid to think. They ask questions others are conditioned not to ask. They live possibilities others are too controlled to attempt. Every system requires individuals who can step outside it and assess whether it still serves its purpose or merely perpetuates itself. If you are someone who keeps no friends, Jung's message is simple. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are not missing what others have. You are accessing what most never find. Your solitude is not a flaw to fix. It is a strength to defend. Your resistance to conformity is not weakness. It is immunity to the most powerful control system humanity has ever constructed. Your discomfort in social settings is not anxiety that needs correction. It is your nervous system recognizing that performing a false self is more damaging than being alone with your authentic one. The dangerous truth Jung uncovered is that the loner represents human potential freed from collective limitations. And that freedom, that sovereignty, that psychological independence is exactly what every control system fears most. Not because loners seek to destroy society, but because their existence proves its control mechanisms are optional. That you can choose differently. That you can live by your own values. That psychological completeness does not require validation from people who have never examined themselves. The loner is not dangerous because they are malicious. They are dangerous because they are free. And freedom, Jung realized, is contagious. Every person who achieves psychological sovereignty through solitude and shadow integration grants permission for others to attempt the same path. This is why groups punish loners so harshly. Not because loners cause harm, but because their existence threatens the agreements that keep everyone else controlled. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.